If we were to walk onto a battlefield in 480 BCE and sweep the dust off a discarded clay bowl, we wouldn't just find crumbs, we would find the DNA of an empire. We're looking at a forensic artifact, an autopsy of power hidden within a soldier's daily intake. This wasn't just lunch. It was a calculated chemical fuel designed to propel 10,000 identical shadows across 3 continents. When we look at the rations of the Persian immortals, we aren't observing a culinary choice. We are looking at the evidence locker of the Achaemenid military machine. To the Greeks, the immortals appeared as a supernatural force, a tide of gold and iron that never diminished. If one fell, another appeared instantly, maintaining a terrifying constant number. But the real magic wasn't mystical, it was logistical. Behind every spear was a mountain of grain, a river of wine, and a system of accounting so precise it could tell you exactly how many grams of barley it took to conquer a city. This meal represents the first time in history that a government treated the human stomach as a standardized unit of imperial expansion. It is the moment food became a weapon of mass mobilization. Today, we are analyzing this historical menu as an autopsy of power. To understand the Persian table, you have to stop thinking about recipes and start thinking about inventory. The Achaemenid Empire didn't just feed its people, it calculated them. In the administrative heart of Persepolis, thousands of clay tablets, the fortification records, reveal a world where calories were the primary currency of control. As historian Pierre Briant highlights, the Persian king didn't just rule territory, he managed a global pantry. Every morsel of food consumed by an immortal was a physical manifestation of a tax paid by a distant satrapy. The social anatomy of this meal begins with a radical concept, the travel ration. For the first time, a soldier's worth was measured in standardized dry goods. An immortal received a base ration of barley, roughly 1 to 1.5 liters per day, supplemented by wine or beer and occasionally meat or fruit. But look closer at the labor hierarchy required to put that grain in a bowl. This wasn't a local farmer selling to a passing troop. This was a state-run supply chain involving thousands of magush, administrators, royal storehouse keepers, and a massive underclass of forced laborers who processed the grain. The disparity in this social autopsy is jarring. While the immortals were the elite, their diet was a study in functional minimalism compared to the officers and the king himself. When the Great King moved, he brought a mobile palace that consumed hundreds of sheep, oxen, and gazelles daily, accompanied by delicate wines from Chalaban. This excess wasn't just greed, it was political signaling. By providing the immortals with a consistent, reliable, and superior ration compared to the average peasant, the king bought their immortality. He transformed their physical survival into a debt owed to the throne. Furthermore, the rations tell us about ethnic stratification. The immortals were strictly Persians, Medes, or Elamites, the ethno-imperial core. While auxiliary troops from the fringes of the empire might scramble for local forage, the immortals were sustained by the royal road system. This infrastructure ensured that even in the middle of a desert, a Persian soldier ate like a man backed by the greatest bureaucracy on earth. The labor of a grain grinder in Babylon and a vineyard worker in Lydia converged in a single soldier's haversack. To eat these rations was to consume the combined labor of 20 different conquered nations. It was a daily reminder of who owned the world's resources and who was merely a tool used to guard them. The system was so refined that it included specialized rations for different ranks, creating a ladder of status within the army itself. An officer might receive twice the grain and a portion of poultry, not because he was twice as hungry, but because his social weight required more space at the table. In this empire, your proximity to the king was measured by the complexity of your plate. The immortals stood at the gate of this hierarchy, well-fed enough to be elite, but standardized enough to remain a replaceable cog in the 10,000-man machine. This wasn't just sustenance, it was a map of who held the spear and who held the ledger. To truly understand the immortal, we have to move away from the ledger and into the grit of the camp. Recreating this meal isn't a matter of fine dining, it is an exercise in industrial endurance. I started with the foundation, the barley. In modern kitchens, we buy pearl barley that cooks in 20 minutes, but the Achaemenid ration was raw, whole-grain barley, often still holding on to its tough, fibrous husk. The first thing you notice is the sound, the rhythmic, bone-deep ache of the stone quern. To turn a daily ration of 1.5 liters of grain into flour with a hand stone takes nearly 2 hours of constant circular grinding. As an explorer of this process, my shoulders burned within 30 minutes. This is the hidden cost of the Persian military, the labor of the camp. Historians like Herodotus mention the vast trains of concubines and servants following the army, and we must realize that a significant portion of that baggage was actually a mobile flour mill. The immortals didn't just carry spears, they were preceded by the sound of thousands of stones crushing grain. Once the flour is rendered, coarse, sandy, and smelling of dry earth, the chemistry of survival begins. I mixed the barley flour with water and a small amount of salt, creating a dense, heavy dough. There is no yeast here, no luxury of time for a slow rise. This is unleavened power. I shaped the dough into flat, wide discs, similar to a traditional naan. But here is the judgment call: portability versus palatability. If you bake it soft, it rots within 48 hours. To make a ration that lasts a week on the royal road, you have to bake it twice or cook it until it is bone dry, essentially a hardback biscuit. As I laid these discs over a fire fueled by dried dung and scrub brush, the common fuels of a marching army, the sensory experience changed. The smell isn't the sweet aroma of a modern bakery, it is toasted, nutty, and slightly acrid. The heat of the fire transforms the barley sugars into a hard, protective crust. Tearing into one of these after it cooled was a revelation in dental resilience. It is a slow eat. You don't bolt this food, you gnaw it. It requires saliva, time, and effort. To supplement the dry grain, I looked to the oil and wine mentioned in the Persepolis tablets. I added a side of fermented sheep's milk, a precursor to modern yogurt or kashk, and a handful of dried figs and walnuts. This is where the sage interprets the evidence. This combination is a masterpiece of pre-modern nutritional science. The barley provides complex carbohydrates for long march endurance. The walnuts offer dense fats. The dried fruit provides immediate glucose for a quick energy spike. And the fermented milk provides the probiotics necessary to keep a soldier's gut from collapsing under the stress of foreign water sources. The most difficult part of the recreation wasn't the cooking, but the sourcing of the watered wine. The Persians were famous for their love of wine, but on the march it was a tool of sanitation. By mixing a ration of sour, acidic wine into questionable well water, the alcohol and acetic acid acted as a mild disinfectant. Drinking this lukewarm, vinegary mixture out of a bronze bowl, I felt the physical reality of the immortal persona. You are fueled by a diet that is incredibly shelf-stable, calorie-dense, and utterly monotonous. The sheer time cost is what stays with you. Between grinding, fire tending, and slow masticating this dense fuel, a soldier's rest was actually a secondary shift of food processing. The empire didn't just provide the food, it demanded the soldiers' remaining life force to prepare it. Only an elite professional force could maintain this level of dietary discipline without breaking. The meal is heavy in the stomach, a constant physical weight that anchors the soldier to the earth he is currently conquering. When we reassemble these fragments, the pulverized barley, the salted fats, and the wine-stained water, the supernatural myth of the immortals evaporates, replaced by a much more terrifying reality. We aren't looking at a group of warriors, we are looking at a human extension of a state-run warehouse. The taste of this ration confirms the power of the Achaemenid throne. It is the taste of a standardized, predictable world where geography has been conquered by a supply chain. The labor involved reveals the true hierarchy of the ancient world. An immortal didn't have to hunt, forage, or beg. His survival was guaranteed by a king who could move mountains of grain across deserts. This reliability was the ultimate psychological weapon. While their enemies faced the seasonal uncertainty of tribal warfare, the Persian soldier was backed by the first true military-industrial complex. The excess of the king's table and the consistency of the soldier's bowl functioned together to communicate a single message: resistance is futile against a machine that never runs out of fuel. We don't just cook ancient food, we decode the civilizations behind them. The immortals weren't invincible because of their armor. They were invincible because their empire had mastered the art of turning calories into compliance. The spear was merely the final point of a logistical line that stretched back to the furthest reaches of the known world.